Hey everybody, in today's video I'm going to show you how I built my flip top stand with my compound sliding miter saw on the top and my planer on the bottom. Let's get into it. I almost never need both these tools at the same time, so I've designed this cart so that I can flip it so that the chop saw is on top when I need to use that, or flip it the other way and have the planer available when I need to use that. You can see it's got these knobs at each of the corners as a locking mechanism to add both extra strength and to make sure that the table is going to be as sturdy as possible. It's on wheels, so it's easy to roll, but each of the casters is also locking to make sure it doesn't roll away from me when I'm using it. And I've got this drawer at the bottom where I can store extra parts or supplies or extra accessories for these tools. Now, as you can see, this saw is really fairly large, and it doesn't fit on my workbench because my workbench is only about 24 inches deep, about like this, and there wasn't room for the back arm and the front of the saw to extend, so I found that I just didn't have space for it in my shop. Also, the planer I don't use very often, and it's really heavy. A lot of times it just sits there on my bench taking up extra space. So this cart kind of solves two problems for me. It gives me a spot where I can have this compound miter saw set up, that I can use it and have access to it and have the space that I need for it. And it gives me a great place to store my planer while still making it available when I do need to use it. So my original plan was to see if I could build this out of a single sheet of plywood, and without the drawer I would have been able to. The entire frame and body of the stand is out of a single sheet of plywood, and here's the measurements and the cuts that I used for that. The drawer, I used a few pieces of scrap to finish it off. Now, as with any project that is built out of plywood, this always starts by breaking down the sheet, and I used a combination of my table saw and circular saws to do this. Sometimes I, like in this shot, cut the pieces two at a time to both make it easier and faster and to make sure that they were exactly the same size. I then knocked down the corners and removed any burrs with a little bit of sandpaper. And then I got started drilling holes for the pocket screws. Now, I know some of you aren't big fans of pocket holes, but they're fairly strong and they're really fast, and that's the main reason I wanted to use them in this project. You'll see in this particular joint, this is adjoining the base to the sides. I did go ahead and put some glue into the joint as well to have a little bit of added extra strength, but this is the only joint that is going to be using glue, and you'll see why here in just a little bit. After I attached the first side, I used a few of the other pieces in a V shape to hold up that side in the correct position so that I could attach the other side. That made it a lot easier than trying to figure out some way to hold it and screw it down at the same time. Okay, with the two sides attached, it was time to install the shelf, again with pocket screws to support it. I cut out some pieces of scrap as spacers to hold the shelf up to the right height, and then just screwed in the pocket screws. Again, I left glue out of this joint, and you'll see why that was important in a little bit. With the shelf attached, then I could attach the casters. That was as simple as holding the caster where I thought it was going to go, marking the holes, and drilling them. Now I'm using these carriage bolts to attach the casters because I didn't want to have anything protruding up into the space where the drawer is going to be. And these carriage bolts are perfect for that. I got some pretty short ones because I knew that I didn't want to have them sticking down below where the wheel was going to swing, and these are the perfect size. You can see here as I tighten down the nut, it sinks the head of that carriage bolt down into the surface of the plywood. It's really strong and it stays out of the way of the drawer. All four wheels got attached the same way, and here's what those look like when they're completely finished. Took time to do a quick little test to make sure it was going to roll really easily, and I was surprised with just how smooth and easy it did roll. And then it was time to build the flip top itself. And this started by framing it out with some 2x4 lumber, which I just attached at the corners with some simple long screws. Again, this isn't the strongest way to do this, but I'm going to be sandwiching it between more plywood, so I think this will be plenty strong. I checked it for square and it was a little bit out, so I grabbed one of my big furniture clamps and squeezed it in to be perfectly square. And then I attached one of the faces that's going to be on one side of the flip top, and I only did it at each of the four corners. And you'll see why here in just a minute. Once that was on, I could test the flip top for fit, and it's a good fit. It looks like it's going to be perfect. So it's time to haul out the planer and stick it up on top. And I measured carefully for its placement. I wanted to try and get it as close to center as possible. Then I marked each of the holes and removed the planer and drilled the holes that I was going to use to mount it. Now I'm using these little anchors that are the kind that you pound into the back side of what you're screwing in, and they're threaded on their interior so you can then drive bolts through them, and they hold just like a nut would. but you don't have to get inside there to try and tighten down the nut. It's a really convenient kind of a connector. With those installed, I could then attach this piece to the flip top as well. Only instead of putting screws at just the corners for this one, I spaced them at about 3 or 4 inches apart all the way around the perimeter. With that part of the assembly finished, now I could measure and mark the holes for the pipe that is going to be used as the pivot point for this flip top. And you'll see here, after I get it all marked out very carefully, I drill only about halfway through, and then I go around to the inside and finish the hole. And this helps avoid any tear out. With both holes drilled, I could do a quick test fit of the pipe, and it looks like it's going to be a perfect fit. Then I decided to add a couple more pieces of reinforcement along the center of the pipe, just to make sure that that plywood wasn't taking all of the weight of these big heavy tools. Then, just as I did with the planer, I popped my saw on there and measured it very carefully to make sure it was going to be centered, and marked its holes, drilled them out, and put in the same kind of anchors that I used for the planer to get it ready to mount as well. And with all of its anchors in, now it could be attached permanently, so I went ahead and marked out about every 3 or 4 inches all the way around the perimeter and put screws in all the way around. With the flip top completely finished, now I could turn back to the base, measure and mark the holes for the pipe there, and then I had to borrow my son here for a little bit because this was kind of a 2-person job to get this pipe through, but once it's through, the flip top flips really well. Alright, now we've got to find a way to lock this flip top in place, and I thought about a couple of different ways to do this, and ultimately I settled on this technique. These are little anchors that screw into an oversized hole, and they're threaded on the inside, and these allow you to screw in a knob like this. They're a little tricky to install. I found the easiest way to do it was actually to drill out the holes first, and then to thread the insert onto the knob in the first place, and then just use the knob to drive the insert into the wood where it belongs. Then just pull the knob back out, and it's installed. I put one at each of the corners, and this is going to help stiffen up the entire thing as well as help support the weight of the tools. And then I flipped the cart down and slapped it back behind where the drawer was planning to be. And then it was time to start mounting tools and see how well they cleared once flipped. Just using bolts and a ratchet here to put those down into those anchors that you saw earlier. Alright, with that tool anchored down, it's time for our first test flip. I was super excited to see how well this was going to rotate and flip down and fit just perfectly, and then, well, it didn't. Now, what did I do wrong here? I'd measured so carefully. So I screwed up. Here's what I did wrong. When I was measuring how much of a space I needed here, I was forgetting to calculate the height of the shelf. I thought I was just pivoting about the bottom of the tool. So there's an extra 2.5 inches that I didn't account for. And you know where that 2.5 inches winds up biting me? With this handle right here. This thing sticks up a little too far. I'm going to try taking it off just to see if it rotates correctly. If it does, then I know how much I need to move my shelf. So off came the back behind the shelf, and then after I remeasured everything really carefully, I cut out some new little inserts that I could use as spacers to move the shelf down to the correct height. So here is where I'm really glad I did not use any glue on the joint for that shelf in the first place, because otherwise moving it would have been almost impossible to do without really destroying this entire project. So with the shelf moved down just a few inches, now things clear perfectly. So I installed both tools, and now it flips freely in both directions. So now that the flip top is done and working and everything is spaced out exactly the way I want it, it's time to turn my attention to building a little drawer for the bottom. Now I'm not going to really go into tons of detail about how I built this. I used pocket screws for all of the joints, and I just used mostly scrap that I had laying around the shop already anyway. The only exception to that is I did use another little piece of 3/4 inch plywood for the face, simply so that it would match the exterior of the cabinet as well. But there's really nothing very fancy about this drawer. About the only thing I'll mention is that if you're building a drawer that's just really a simple box like this, make sure that your face is going to be a little bit wider than the body of the drawer. That way the face will overhang and cover up the gap that you have to leave for the slides that you're going to install on the side of the drawer. Now, installing drawer slides can be really tricky. It's really difficult if you're just measuring and marking and trying to make sure that you get things lined up exactly right based on your measurements. Well, if you're anything like me, you're going to get things installed crooked and screwy-wampus. It's just not going to be exactly right. So the way I like to do it is place a little spacer that's going to set the height of my drawer slides, and once the drawer slides are at the correct height, I just screw them into the interior of the cabinet. Once those are in, then I can install into the drawer slides the part that is going to be attached to the drawer itself. And with those in place, then I can place the drawer into the cabinet approximately where I want it to be. The only thing to remember here is that you need to lift the drawer off the bottom of the cabinet just about a 1/4 inch or maybe even a little less. So to do that, I use a little spacer underneath the drawer to lift it up to the correct height. Then you can pull out the slides that go on the sides of the drawer, revealing the screw holes for them. And with the spacer under the drawer and the slides in exactly the right position, it's as simple as just screwing them into your drawer. It's so easy to install drawers this way that I just don't even bother measuring anymore. I forgot to film it, but I also installed a little handle on this drawer, and then the cabinet's done. As soon as it was finished, I just couldn't resist. I had to give it a try. So I flipped it to the planer side, grabbed some stock that I've got for another project that needed to be planed anyway, ran a couple pieces through, and was really happy with just how stable it is with those wheels locked. When I was finished with the planing, it was a really easy process to flip it over to the saw, get that set up instead so that then I could cut out some other pieces for a different project as well. Oh, and one other thing. I built this for a planer and for a saw, but this design can be adapted for just about any kind of large mountable tool that you might have in your shop. Maybe you've got a drill press or a sander or something else that's kind of taken up some space and could really benefit from having a mobile stand that it sits on that you can flip between tools. You could use this exact same design for just about anything like that. All right, well, as you can see, this is really easy to use. It's going to save me so much space and time in my shop as I'm working on various woodworking projects in the future. Now, one of the other really nice things about building your own shop furniture is that you never really have to be done with it. In fact, I've already thought of at least one thing I want to add to this cart. I'd like to add some flip-out wings on both sides to act as supports for the miter saw. So maybe stay tuned for something in a future video about that. But more importantly, I'd really love to know what you think I should be adding to this cart. What did I miss? What did I forget? Are there other ideas that you have that you think I should be adding to this cart? If so, let me know down in the comments. I'd love to hear it. And stay tuned, you may just see it in a future video. If you liked what you've seen here today, maybe think about giving me a little thumbs up. If you want to see more videos like this in the future, then hit that subscribe button, but no pressure. And as always, thank you very much for watching.